Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Well, Darwin Porter is one of our regular columnists at Boomer Times and Senior Life. And I'm Dan Verity, and I'm the administrator at Boomer Times. And I have to say, what a pleasure and a thrill it is to be speaking to Darwin Porter today. Hi, Darwin.
Good afternoon, Dan. Nice to talk to you, too.
Yes, absolutely. We haven't met before, but...
we've exchanged emails.
We have, yes.
People don't speak to each other anymore. They exchange emails.
I know. And you know, and part of my job being an administrator back at the office is, you know, a lot of email and not too many phone calls, but, you know, a lot of it is done electronically. So, my gosh, what a thrill and a pleasure. It is an honor for me, actually, to hear your voice, and we get to meet by telephone. And,
well, I'll tell you, it has been one hell of a year, just gone by, and we have enough material here for 50 shows.
We do.
I am very, very saddened at the number of cultural figures that America lost last year. And
what is going on?
Oh, it was just a massive death, and a very few of them were my personal friends, and I could go on and on about that. But the two women that had the greatest impact on me and my life would be Zsa Zsa Gabor and Debbie Reynolds. I want to talk mostly about Debbie,
right.
but a few words about Zsa Zsa. Ironically, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but her adopted son, Prince van Alhout, she adopted him with the son of her last husband. You know, he was involved in a fatal motor accident the same day she died.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, and then along comes Carrie, has that heart attack on the plane and dies, and then within 24 hours, her mother dies. So this was the oddest coincidence of Zsa Zsa and Debbie and their offspring. Well, of course, I said adopted. It was not Zsa Zsa's offspring, but I just thought that was so. I didn't read about that in the press, but I was told that the Van Alhout, her adopted son, died. Now he was the son of her present husband, Prince Frederick von Anhalt. So that was just a great coincidence. And just a few things about Zsa Zsa. I met her, believe it or not, I'm giving away my age, in 1957. And I was in college, and we were flown as part of a group to the Shamrock Hilton Hotel. She had long since divorced Conrad Hilton because he caught her sleeping with his son, Nicky, who went on to marry Elizabeth Taylor. But they were still friends. And she was absolutely wonderful and dynamic. And she said, now I want each of you boys, when you grow up in 5 years, to come back and come up and see me sometime, a line she borrowed from Mae West. But from that on, I just became enchanted with all the Gabors. And I was... Thank God I'm the only writer who really wrote about all three sisters in a book called Those Glamorous Gabors, Bombshells from Budapest. A lot of that information became from Jolie. By coincidence, I became good friends late in life with Jolie, and she told me a lot of information about her daughters, but she never knew I was going to put it in a book one day. So, you never trust a journalist, but you probably know that already.
Yes.
But anyway, I think with the passing of Zsa Zsa, there goes glamour. I don't see Meryl Streep, Jennifer Aniston, Angie, people like that having the kind of glamour, sort of an old-fashioned, almost Belle Epoque glamour that Zsa Zsa personified. And I was amazed at how many calls came in from the world press. A lot of headlines said, "Good night, darling." She called everyone darling.
That's right.
And so Zsa Zsa has gone on her way. And then Debbie.
Yeah.
Oh, my God, Debbie.
What a shock.
Well, I was actually shocked that Carrie Fisher died so young. she has just come out with a book, The Princess Diaries, and we know what princess means in this case. Anybody who saw Star Wars. And then she was only 60, and Debbie was 84. And then Debbie died soon afterward. Now, some people say, well, Debbie died of a broken heart. I thought that was just a romantic fantasy. Right. But the American Heart Association says that 1% of heart attacks are caused by broken hearts. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You knew it, but I didn't.
I've heard of that before.
Well, I'd heard of it, but didn't believe it.
Right, yeah.
You know, I mean, I've survived all my broken hearts.
Right. As I.
But I knew Debbie over a period of many, many years. I met her in 1960. Now, that was 8 years after she had done Singing in the Rain.
Right.
And it was at a party, and Gene Kelly, her co-star in Singing in the Rain, was there. And he told a wonderful story that I don't think I've heard before from anybody else. He said Debbie had come on, he told it right in front of her. He said Debbie had come on so virginal that I decided I was going to be an imp. So we had this love scene together. So he said, I gave her a big, sloppy French kiss. He said, she broke away, she started screaming and spitting, and she had to run to her dressing room to gargle. I mean, so he said, that convinced me that Debbie was a virgin.
Yes. And of course,
that was one. And she said, "You were such a devil. You were such a devil. You worked me to death. I hate you. I hated you at the time, but now that it's called the best musical of all time, I love you."
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you can't help but watch that musical and just think happy thoughts and just it just fills your heart with just such joy, doesn't it?
You're absolutely right. I just saw it again the other night, and it really moved me. But now, I know that Debbie would consider this heresy, but I also liked Eddie Fisher. Yeah. I mean, Eddie Fisher, Frank Sinatra called him a putz, and in later life he was, and he didn't do right by Debbie, but he had a great deal of charm. I met him. Now, she married him in 1955. And, of course, she had the two children with him, Todd, who is still alive, and Carrie Fisher. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But in a way, I don't want to put Eddie down because when I met him at Grossinger's, which was a famous resort up in the Catskills.
Sure.
And he was wonderful. But, you know, I over the years, followed his love affairs. You have some very famous women succumb. I don't mean just Elizabeth Taylor.
Right.
The whole world knows that. But I mean people like Edie Adams, who was a famous singer.
Right.
Pierre Angeli, an actress, Anne Margaret, a woman named Judith Campbell, who became famous as the notorious mistress of JFK and Sam Giancana. And are you ready? Marlene Dietrich. Now, what Marlene was doing with Eddie. Yeah. But it goes on. Mia Farrow, Judy Garland.
Oh, my gosh. So he had
Hope
this
Lang,
charm.
I don't know if you remember Hope Lang. She was a famous actress.
Yeah.
Meryl Oberon and Maria Schell. And now, the name of yesterday. Hello?
Yes.
Oh, I thought I heard a beep. I thought we went off the air.
Sorry.
I thought someone was answering us and we went off the air. And I had to throw in this other one. Pamela Tenure, who was the press secretary to Jackie Kennedy. And then he also patronized more hookers in Los Angeles. I once talked to a woman named Sadie. Don't you think a madam should always be called Sadie?
Absolutely.
And he said, Eddie was my best customer. He ordered a different one every night.
No kidding.
He never wanted a repeat. So Sadie specialized in providing high-class hookers to the stars. So Eddie really got around. The only thing that I really disliked about him was when he told Debbie, when he was leaving her for Elizabeth Taylor, he said, I never really loved you, but I love Elizabeth. And, of course, Elizabeth was Debbie's best friend. But it was very interesting to observe that over the years, they both, I think they were sailing on the Queen Elizabeth, and they made up, and they both agreed they're better off having gotten rid of Eddie.
Right, yeah. That must have been, I can't even imagine to be, to have something like this happen. Your husband leaves you for your best friend, and
I know.
Gosh, of course, it's celebrities. It was all over the tabloids, and this was huge news.
Biggest scandal. Oh, just a great scandal, because Eddie and Debbie were American sweethearts.
Right.
Now, a lot of people didn't get to see it because I think it was only one night. But Carrie Fisher, in 2001, wrote a TV film called Those Old Broads.
Right.
I don't know if you got to see it or not. And it starred Shirley MacLaine, Elizabeth Taylor, and Debbie Reynolds.
Right, yes.
I have that in my file somewhere. I'm going to look at it again. But the famous movie that Carrie wrote about her mother was Postcards from the Edge.
Yes.
Now, that was clearly based on Debbie.
Right.
And Debbie went to Mike Nichols and she said, can I play myself? And Nichols said, you're not right for the role. I'm giving it to Shirley MacLaine. And she said, what do you mean? Shirley MacLaine has to impersonate me? But Shirley MacLaine and Debbie were sort of like friendly rivals.
Right, yes.
The studio wanted Shirley MacLaine to star in The Unthinkable Molly Brown, which was the only movie that won Oscar nomination for Debbie. And they said, no, the role is too strong. It has to have a powerhouse like Shirley MacLaine.
Right.
And then Shirley MacLaine was busy.
Right,
and
yes.
So Debbie came through and delivered her, well, if you don't count Singing in the Rain, it would certainly be her greatest performance.
It was.
Now, I want to tell you, by the way, I knew Debbie over the years, and in the 70s, and this is a horrible story, but she, as she said, I didn't know how to pick men. Now, after Eddie, she married Harry Carl, who was rich at the time, but apparently she gave him access to her funds, and he really went through those. And she also married a third husband, Richard Hamlet, and once again, she must have turned over her bank account. Now, my company hired her in the 70s to do, are you ready, a Singer sewing machine commercial.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think poor Debbie knew what a Singer sewing machine was, but now she told us that she was that her second husband had left her so penniless that she was sleeping in her car and quote, refreshing up in public toilets. Now, Debbie Reynolds didn't make that up. She really had lost her home and everything. And fortunately, the job paid $125,000, which is not a fortune, but if you're broke, that's a lot of money. And
absolutely.
And we were so glad to get her work. And the Debbie that I met and worked with in the 70s was not the woman of 1960. She had become a little more hardened by life. And why not?
Yeah, of course.
She still was sweet Tammy for the public, but just a little bit more hardened. Now, this is a story that money came to her too late. Very late, she's had to sell off all those memorabilia that she collected. She was going to open a museum in Tennessee and Las Vegas. And you may have seen in the paper, she owned the dress that Marilyn Monroe wore in 7 Year Itch, where over the subway grate where blows up the white dress.
It twirled up.
Twirled up. And Debbie owned it. And she sold it for $4.8 million.
Oh, my gosh.
The highest price ever paid for a dress since the dawn of time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who bought it, but I mean, what are you going to do with it? But anyway, wear it?
Right, yeah, right.
I don't know.
I guess
but whoever bought it had money to burn, right?
Right, and it didn't matter what they did with it if you have that kind of money to pay for a dress.
Exactly.
You know?
Well, it is an iconic dress, of course.
Sure, of course.
But then she sold her entire collection,
Mm-hmm.
and she netted $25 million.
Isn't that amazing?
Now, here, of course, I assume Todd will get it.
Right.
Todd Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine sleeping in your car, but if you stick around long enough, you'll get $25 million.
It's just something that can only happen to Debbie Reynolds.
Yeah, well, in a way,
You know?
now, Carrie Fisher, not only with Star Wars, but Carrie Fisher also was an author and a performer.
Mm-hmm.
And her home, she has a daughter, Billy, and
Right.
her home, I looked it up in the real estate, is now valued at the same price, $25 million.
Wow.
Her home,
Yeah.
not her bank account. So, it's amazing how apparently Carrie and Debbie are going to leave their offspring are very well off.
Yeah, and Debbie and Carrie actually have houses next to each other.
Yes, isn't that now for 10 years? I remember when I worked with Debbie
Mm-hmm.
in the television. At that time, she and her daughter were not even speaking.
Right. Yeah, that was a sad time.
It was a sad time, and they went 10 whole years without speaking.
That's hard to
Now,
imagine.
It didn't come as any surprise that my bosses at NBN, they want me. Well, I've got 2 books overdue, but they want me to do a mother-daughter story, not of a biography
Mm-hmm.
of Carrie and Debbie. And so it's a great story, but a story of heartbreak and pain. And Carrie didn't have as much luck. She had no more luck with men than her mother did. You know, she married Paul Simon.
Right. Yes. I remember
Simon
that.
and Garfunkel. They were my favorite singers for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then her other husband, we don't have to name him, but he one day came in the house and said, "Carrie, you've made me gay." She said, "I made you gay?" Yeah, he said, "I was a straight man until I married you." Of course, and he says, "Now I'm gay, and not only am I gay, but I found a husband." And so, by the way, Mr. Lord, his name is Lord. They have a daughter, Billy,
Right.
who will, of course, get the inheritance. And apparently, he found his true love, and they have lived happily ever after. But I thought it was fascinating. Now, what was the most shocking story that Carrie ever said about her mother? Well, all right. Are you ready? Are
Yes.
you sitting down?
I am.
She said that her mother wanted Debbie's third husband, Richard Hamlet, to do an artificial insemination and have a child with him because her husband had such beautiful blue eyes.
What?
Now, Carrie was never a liar. I mean, almost a woman like Carrie with parents like Eddie and Debbie, she didn't have to make up any stories.
No, absolutely not.
And I just thought I had to write that down as the strangest story I've ever heard. I mean, I'm sure it's actually happened with some mothers and daughters, but I had never heard of 2 famous people say something like that.
No.
I understand that you've been a fan of Debbie for many years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I had the pleasure of watching Postcards from the Edge the other night for, I don't know, the 12th time or whatever.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yes. So it's still very fresh in my mind. And, watching those 2 characters interact with each other, I can absolutely, now that you're mentioning this story, I could absolutely picture those 2 having that conversation about, I want my stepfather to
Yeah.
Father, my child.
I have one shocker to say about Debbie.
Please share.
But Eddie Fisher did not take her virginity. So she dined out on Eddie Fisher taking her virginity. I will now reveal who took her virginity.
Drum roll.
He was an Italian singer from Hoboken.
Hoboken, New Jersey.
His name was Frank Sinatra.
No kidding.
She and Frank Sinatra had a brief affair. In fact, in 1955, the year she married Eddie Fisher.
Right.
She and Frank, you may have seen it. They made a movie called The Tender Trap.
Yes. Yeah.
And so one night, I think it was Dallas where we were shooting this commercial. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I get whether I did something in Dallas or in Houston. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And and I don't believe Debbie never lied. I mean, both mother and daughter were very honest.
Yeah, they were.
And she said that Frank Sinatra, she fell in love with Frank Sinatra. Mm. And, of course, I think there was another woman. Of course, in Frank's case, there were many women working around. But there was a thing called Ava Gardner.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it was hopeless, but apparently, if Debbie is to be believed, and I believe her, Frank Sinatra did the dirty deed.
Boy, what a couple, a power couple that would have been. Frank Sinatra and Debbie Reynolds, huh?
Yeah, I thought so. Debbie, now, as you know, I kept following. The last time I met with her was in 1999 in Atlantic City, New Jersey, where she was appearing, and I noticed as her appearances, she was a real trooper, and she kept working till the very end.
I know she did.
Amazing. But little sweet Tammy that I used to see in her shows, by the time the end of the century was coming to an end, she became much more risque. And some people would say vulgar. Let me give you a quick example. I think we won't go off the air if I say this. She told all 100 people out there, she said, I've married a Jew and I've married a Gentile. And the only difference I saw between them was just a little piece of skin.
I can picture her saying that.
I thought, good for you, Debbie. I mean, Tammy's dead and gone.
Right, exactly, yeah. Yep. It's funny that you should mention just something that just clicked in my mind probably about 10 years ago, I guess it is. I saw Florence Henderson on stage. She was doing her sort of little her show.
Oh,
and
I saw that too. Yes.
Talk about risque. I had no idea. I just, for the first 10 minutes, I sat there with my mouth open and then, got comfortable with the rest of the show. But Mrs. Brady.
We associated her with the TV.
Yeah. Mrs. Brady was certainly not Mrs. Brady on stage.
The Brady Bunch. But actually, I think that Debbie's later acts reflected the pain that she suffered.
Right.
And she did suffer a great deal of pain.
She did, yeah.
And she saw her very persona of Tammy go out of style. And, many actresses retreat to the Hollywood Hills, sort of a Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard. And Debbie didn't. And she was out there. She was a trooper to the very end. And I really admire. I always liked her very, very much. I mean, I'm more of a Betty Davis, Joan Crawford type guy, but I found her behind that sweetness. There was also a rather sharpness to her that she concealed from the public, but she had been stepped on so many times and been so disappointed that I think it gave her more of a cutting edge in her in her last years. And then she had all that trouble with Carrie Fisher. when I put all this on paper, it is sad because Carrie was bipolar,
Mm-hmm.
Been in a mental institution. It just went on, and for such a sweet Tammy to have, and these men,
Yeah.
It was hard on her. And then I did find out another, I have many tantalizing details about Debbie, but she threatened to sue Eddie Fisher in his second memoir. Because he wrote extensively about what was called the ugly rumor that she was involved in a long-term lesbian relationship with a very distinguished actress, Agnes Moorehead.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
And now Agnes Moorehead was her very close friend. Agnes Moorehead was indeed a lesbian. I'm sure you remember her, don't you?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
A brilliant, talented actress, and she was a lesbian, and she formed a very, very close bond, and became, I thought, almost like a substitute mother figure for Debbie. And who knows the full extent of the relationship, but Agnes Moorehead gave her, was a great crutch for her during many dark nights in Debbie's life. And I'm glad that Agnes could play that role, really. You know?
Well, we will.
But anyway, Eddie's publisher then, it was almost a whole chapter he devoted. So in his last memoir, the publisher then removed the section on Agnes Moorehead.
Mm-hmm. Well, Darwin, it has been my honor and pleasure to speak to you today about the life and death of Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher.
Well, I hope I told you something you hadn't heard before.
You absolutely have, and I treasure you for that.
I hope you have a very good show today, and it's been great talking to you too.
It sure has. Thanks,
Take
Darwin.
care now, and a good new year for you.
Thank you, and to you too. Thanks, Darwin.